Now, okay, hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Chicago redlining, segregation, and the many effects of money division in Chicago. Okay. Segregation is in the past. Get over it. No such thing as redlining. People can live wherever they want. If you ever heard statements like this, you're probably a Chicagoan and asking all the right questions. Chicago has a 250-year history of segregation and redlining, where where this is a generational practice that has caused not only division between races, but also the division of funding and resources, disproportionately affecting Black and Brown communities. The Chicago Defender reported that though the Supreme Court in 1917 ruling Buchanan v. Worley declared residential segregation laws unconstitutional, it said nothing of private segregation practices. Although this was 100 years ago, we're still experiencing the consequences of these today. When you all leave your homes, have you ever thought about your surroundings, how much greenery there is or lack thereof, and who lives beside you, and what those changes look like? From your trash services to your taxes and your grocery store, there are politicians in place that are taking care of those issues. After researching the long history of segregation and the economic repercussions that division has had on housing access, school funding, and the purchasing of goods and more, we can begin to understand the magnitude of the injustices and how it affects the livelihood in the present. Today, I will inform you about the history behind the hate-fueled division of Chicago neighborhoods, the generational issues facing underfunded communities affected by redlining and segregation, and to end with information from Yusan Hussev, my grandma's neighbor. He's a 31-year-old resident in the Chicago community of Ashburn. I interviewed him for this speech. In understanding the history behind the hate-fueled division of Chicago neighborhoods, we must start at the beginning. Although we can't examine the entirety of the 250 years history together, I want to give you the highlights. The Chicago Reporter stated that before Illinois was admitted into the Union as a free state in 1818, traders in the Chicago region enslaved Black and Indigenous people. Even into the 1830s, free Indigenous Black Illinois were denied many basic freedoms guaranteed to their white counterparts. Nearly 100 years later, following the Great Depression of the 1920s and the mass job loss and foreclosures in the city, in rebuilding Chicago housing market racially, there was a realtor organization called the NAREB, and in their 1924 Code of Ethics declared that a realtor should never introduce into a neighborhood members of a racial group that will be clearly members of any racial or nationality whose presence will clearly be detrimental. Policies being implemented into the very industry that is in place for homes during the toughest time of the people's lives just showed you the normalcy and complete discrimination. These practices aiding in an uncanny coining of the Black Belt and redlining. The Black Belt was a series of neighborhoods, predominantly Black communities in the 1920s. The Black Belt comprised of richer Blacks living in the South, poorer Blacks living in the North. And as further stated in the Chicago Reporter, the HOLC and the FHA mapped and divided almost every American city into various colors. Black best equals blue, best equals green, blue equals still desirable, and yellow definitely declining. Red zones were often indicated as hazardous. The map purposely indicated these zones, and if you were 10%, if your neighborhood had 10% Black residents, your neighborhood was declared hazardous or redline. There's where we see the transition from individual explicit racism into structural generational housing discrimination. Winley said, and as he stated in Redlining in the Reporter in Chicago. Now that we have established a bit of the origin of segregation in Chicago, we can acknowledge the generational issues facing underfunded communities impacted by redlining and segregation. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, from the 1920s to the 1980s, in Chicago, due to redlining, there is a 40 to 50% equity gap in the home value of African American neighbors. Redlining began in a social economic injustice, however, over time emerges into yellow lining, and these are indicated in neighborhoods who are racially diverse, so desegregated. And they are receiving the ripple effect of redlining, receiving less funding. We must attack our most valuable natural resource, which is our elders. Yusuf Hassan is a self-proclaimed pioneer of the city of Ashburn, of the neighborhood of Ashburn, being the first Black family on his block. A Chicago resident living in his home for 31 years, he feels that the neighborhood experienced white flight due to the influx of other races in a once predominantly white neighborhood. Mr. Hassan informed us that the neighbors' racial integration adjustment wasn't easy and was aided by the intervention of the Chicago Commission of Human Relations, holding space for community. He has not experienced any personal impact from redlining, but says that he has witnessed many accounts as a lifetime Chicago resident. He informed that merely 5 minutes away from Ashburn, in the neighborhood of Evergreen, they were sued by the federal government and due to redlining, and has racially diverse landscape due to these efforts today. The segregation and redlining issue plaguing our Chicago communities are not topical. They are deeply rooted in our history, laws, and economic practices. Segregation didn't end with the slam of a gavel. Today, we are experiencing the effect of these decisions rooted in hatred. Although the past is beyond our control, with knowledge, we have the ability to write our own history and our story for the communities that we love. Thank you.